And
today
we're talking about
roasters. Woo! We're not going to necessarily talk about like roasters as in like specific brands of roasters, but we're going to talk about like how roasters work and how you choose different roasters.
Yeah, because there's quite a few different types of roasters and ways that you can do this process in order to get chocolate.
All right, so I would say the first thing to talk about, just to kind of get it out of the way, is nib roasting versus bean roasting.
Sure. And nib roasting is usually something that we would see on much larger scaled factories.
Totally.
And for very good reasons, because as you were mentioning earlier, it's way better for energy. You use less energy.
Right.
And
you can get like a lot of
even.
Yeah, exactly. Good consistency.
Yeah. And I think nib roasters are usually a continuous roaster.
Yeah, fluid bed roasters. You can do it in like a convection oven, right? You know, you can put nibs into your oven at home and nib roast. But the other thing I
love the idea of it.
Totally. It's also harder to do a light touch roast with nib roasting, I think. Nib roasting you tend to get like a little bit hotter on it.
Well, I like the idea of it because here you have a bunch of even little pieces that you can apply less heat to for probably a less amount of time.
Yeah.
And get a really nice flavor profile. Never done it though.
I was going to say, why don't people nib roast, Dylan?
Because it's really difficult to winnow an unroasted seed. And so when we do roast, what happens is there's moisture in this seed and the shell puffs up, which then becomes very easy to winnow. And that's why I think in nib roasting, it does go through a process where it's flash heated in some form.
Micronizing, as they call it. Yeah.
Can we go into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So basically, if you want to winnow raw beans, what you usually do, it's basically a broiler. You pass beans in like a layer, usually on a conveyor belt, over a really hot, like again, literally imagine a broiler, like like hot on top. Be like passing over it, and so that thing that you were talking about where you get that puff of the shell, you get it really quickly, so you're not like changing the flavor too much of it, but you're still giving it that hit of heat to vaporize the moisture.
Shell puffs up, you can winnow it, and then you can more efficiently roast it.
Right, but it's one more piece of equipment, and so like if you're a small maker, you're like, are you going to buy a micronizer and a winnower and a roaster? No.
You're going to buy probably a convection oven.
Yeah.
Is the way that a lot of
That's how you start. Totally.
That's how, well, when I first started, I actually bought a perforated drum that sat in a barbecue. I can't remember if it was 10 pounds or 10 kilos. I think it was 10 pounds.
It might have been 10 pounds, yeah.
Yeah. So 5 kilos or something like that. And it would spin in the barbecue and I could play with the propane.
Totally.
The only problem was I was not able to taste it. Without having to stop everything, figure out how to get into this drum and start again. So less control.
So the way we started roasting B-Mores, which are the like $300-ish like coffee little, and we literally the way we would roast is we'd put the beans in, we'd put 1 kilo of beans in there, and then you'd listen to it
popping or smelling like brownies
for the popping, and then you're like, it's done, it's popping.
Pull it,
and
dry it.
we would have like a stopwatch because like we were trying to roast like tons and tons of beans 1 kilo at a time in these little things, so you had to like turn them over really quickly.
16-minute roast.
But what we're talking about now are drum roasters, right?
That's right.
So drum roasters, I would say, are the way I'm gonna go with most craft chocolate makers probably roast.
For sure.
Right. Some are still doing convection oven, but I think most tend to use drums.
Which, I like drum roasters a lot. There's a charm to them. They look like trains. Like people walk in.
Yeah, it does feel like
aesthetically.
It feels like industrial equipment. It's like you. Yeah,
they're really pretty.
Right.
They're kind of simple to work on and understand until you have a lot of automation and electronics on it.
Right. I would say there's also, because drum roasters are used in coffee, there's a zillion drum roasters out there.
Right.
So there's a lot of options of like size and scale, and people who are very expert at just roasting.
Two of ours have come from. The first roaster we bought was a San Franciscan coffee roaster that came from a friend who was roasting coffee, and he had two, and he wasn't using it, and it was broken, and we were pretty easily able to fix this.
Right.
And the only thing we had to do to the drum roaster to make it go from coffee to cacao was, I believe we swapped out a gearbox to slow down how fast the drum spins, because otherwise, as it does roast cacao, the shells, the seeds start to break.
Right, you're nib roasting. You're not trying to nib roast, but you're nib roasting.
Bingo.
Yeah, we've done the same thing. So we've gotten a number of drum roasters over the years, and like when we first started getting them, they were cocoa roasters, and now the people who make cocoa roasters, I think, are very good at making cocoa roasters. But like early on, for the small scale that we were looking at, they were mostly coffee roasters, and there's kind of three things you need to do to convert a coffee to a drum. One is it has to go slower, because like coffee drums spin really fast because coffee beans are very hard, but you also want to move them around. You want to agitate them a lot. You don't want that in cocoa, so you need to slow the drum down. The second is, and we learned this the hard way, is that the amount that you can hold in a cooling tray of a coffee roaster is not like per kilo is not the same volume that you can hold for cocoa. And so you need to, so like if a coffee roaster can do 35 kilos, for cocoa it's probably more like 25 to make sure it can fit.
I had the exact opposite experience for the drums. The drums.
Oh, for the drums themselves.
Somewhere around 20% more.
But your cooling tray needs to be big enough to cool it.
And in our case, it was.
Got it.
So let's say our 12 kilo coffee roaster, we were roasting 15 kilos of beans.
Right.
In our 23 kilo coffee roaster, we were roasting 30 kilos of cacao and could get up to about 35 if we pushed it. But then all of a sudden, the door gets forced open. It's spilling out over the cooling carousel. Right. And so that, we found its limit. Yeah.
Well, and then the third thing is coffee roasts hotter. And so the one of the drum roasters we have, where normally there'd be like two sort of like heaters on it, they only put one heater on it for cocoa as opposed to coffee to sort of like make sure you can manage lower temperatures.
So coffee likes, okay, I'm going to speak in Fahrenheit, 420 degrees Fahrenheit, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And cacao, we're roasting 250.
Yeah, I was going to say,
60.
We're somewhere between like 225 and 300.
Yeah, I was going to say we roast somewhere between 235 and 265. That being said, they're all different.
Totally.
So the roaster we're using now is a 100 kilo roaster.
Right.
And shoot, if we get to like, sometimes it'll roast at 112 Celsius. Can you see I'm all messed up?
Depends on the roaster you're looking at. If it's like Celsius or Fahrenheit. No, yeah. I know. Well, and like we have the same challenge where if you switch from a different roaster, actually we even have run into the challenge of well, I guess there's one of the things about roasters is you can have manual roasters or automated roasters.
Right.
So the nice thing about automated roasters...
Benefits of both.
There's benefits of... automated roasters are more expensive.
When things go wrong, it can go really wrong.
Yeah.
Like the drum door won't open.
Right.
And there's no way to manually do it.
Totally. Or like there's some like weird feedback loop happening in the PLC that you don't understand why it's doing what it's doing, and it keeps on like dropping the beans when you're like, what's it? Why? I didn't tell it to do that. So like
when all of a sudden, if you're on a manual roast, you're like, I just need to like taste it and know it's done, and I can manually open this door and let it out.
That's exactly.
I can manually control the valve of propane to increase the gas and
totally. We end up buying automated roasters because what we're trying to do is we basically put a lot of work into trying to build a profile for a single lot of beans, and so this would be like. When I say lot, it's like a single harvest that we've bought from somebody. And so it can be anywhere from 2 tons, actually it can be anywhere from like 300 kilos to 2 tons to 12 tons. But we basically do a bunch of different roasts to try to like dial it in. And then we want that thing replicated again and again and again. And that's what automatic roasters are really good at, is once you figure out exactly what you want and you're like, do this repeatedly, They work well.
It usually takes a couple roasts to get there too.
Oh, we're like, we can take 12, 16 roasts to try to get there to figure out.
And I guess what I'm getting at is when you first do the first roast, the drum's not hot.
Oh.
So you're going to have different parameters for the first one unless you wait.
We do.
You let it heat up.
We like heat it up and
I'm impatient. I do it by taste. And I have no problem with that.
Well, and I would say we're private. I would say we're odd that way. I think most people roast to taste, and I think we do this thing where we like develop a profile and then we want it replicated again and again. Not like one is good and one is bad. It's just like different approaches. But you're right that like the dynamics of like the temperature in the room, like when it's colder in the room versus warmer in the room, like when it's raining, all of these things will change the dynamics.
I usually like to roast when it rains.
So interesting.
For some reason.
Well, this year, maybe you've been roasting a lot then.
We have.
I think having different approaches to roasting means that, people end up having different
chocolate makers' stylistic approach. It's the artistic touch.
That's exactly.
Otherwise, you don't really have much of a difference.
Right. Well, and it like roasting is one of two steps that is really allowing you to control the flavor of what you're doing. I would say the other is conching / oxidation is the one, but I think those are the two main ways you control flavor.
Yeah, for sure. I think the most important step is the beans you choose, followed by roasting, and then it's a combination of the amount you refine and conch.
Right. I agree.
So, convection ovens are when I was making chocolate at my parents' house, I had that drum roaster and a barbecue outside.
Right.
When I leased a space on the second floor of this building, the landlord was like, no.
Yeah. I don't know what that is, but you're not putting that in.
You're not bringing a barbecue in here.
Right.
And so I got a convection roaster. It was just an oven I bought from Sears.
Yeah.
And I used that thing for a couple years. And I would just put them on sheet pans, and I'd have to alternate the sheet pans. I'd put it on convection.
Right.
And it did fine.
Right. A lot of people, like, I think Ritual might have a drum roaster now, but Ritual Chocolate out of Park City was doing convection oven roasting for ages, and their chocolate's great.
Quite a few chocolate makers still are, even though you'd think, oh my gosh, I thought you had gotten a bigger roaster than this. You must be. The problem is you spend a lot of time. You're loading sheet pans, you're sliding them in, you're taking them off sheet pans.
Yep. There's
roasters, you just like drum roasters, you just open the
dump it in and like
cools on the cooling carousel.
And you don't have to, like, the challenge with a convection oven is you're putting trays in, but you have to make sure that you're, as you said, you have to like move things around.
One part of your oven is hotter than the other.
Right. Cacao Hunters, I don't know if they still do it, Cacao Hunters out of Colombia, they had these really nice convection ovens that could take a whole rolling rack to slide into it.
Yeah,
and
like baking.
Yeah, and honestly, that's not like a bad way to go. But again, the one of the main things people like about convection ovens is you can get them. They're they're available anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
They're relatively cheap. They're like easy to repair.
Drum roasters are not cheap.
Drum roasters are not cheap.
Those things are so expensive.
Yeah.
The first one we bought, it was actually the first big machine I bought, and it was like in 2013, and I think it was $22,000 for a 12 kilo used, not working coffee roaster.
Yeah.
But I did it because I was so pissed that I had to pay taxes the previous year when I was just flat out broke and not understanding how this worked.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm never going through that again when I'm spending so much time. I'm going to start to buy my time back with a bigger machine.
Yeah.
And we've done that ever since, and that is how we've grown.
Yeah. We've bought, the largest roaster we've ever purchased was a 70 kilo roaster, and I want to say it was $130,000 or somewhere thereabouts. It is one of the things about drum roasters is that
that's actually a good deal right now.
Well,
I think that same roaster probably goes for closer to two.
Yeah, probably
$200,000 right now.
Although it is one thing about roasters is you can get double the size of roaster doesn't always cost double the amount of money. So it's kind of it's like to go from like a 12.5 kilo to a 25 kilo is not going to cost you double, and then to go from 25 to 60, and then you know what I mean? As you get up in price or up in size, they're the price doesn't just keep on doubling every time. It sort of, but it's still very
I've
expensive.
never really done that math.
We did it once, and so like originally we were thinking of getting like 235 kilos instead of 170, but it's just like 170 was 75% of the price of 235s.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It does. Like as you scale up, you don't have to like. It's like all the components scale up.
Yeah, because they still have to buy all the same parts to assemble these machines, and it's just more material, but the labor doesn't. It's probably the same amount of time for them to put a 70 kilo roaster together as a 35, at least almost.
Yeah, I mean, I would say similarly.
Yeah, it's not a huge difference.
All right.
So, well, one more. Did we talk about continuous roasting?
Well, okay. So
in like any type of.
So it's the last thing, and this is only at scale because these are expensive, is continuous roasters. And so these are roasters that as they're going, basically the beans are being moved through a channel, and whether it's like a fluid bed where there's like, sort of like, exactly. Hot air is moving them, or there's a number of different ways to do it, but it's like continuous roasters are essentially like the beans going in one side, and when they come out the other side, they're roasted. The reason people do this at scale is because like drum roasters and convection ovens are batches. And so you have to like load it, wait for it to roast.
Which is why these continuous roasters would do something like 3 tons an hour.
Yeah.
And they measure by that because it doesn't stop.
Right, exactly. And so I've seen continuous roasters, but I've never used one myself. I know that like, for instance, Zotter, I believe, has a continuous roaster.
I think it is.
They actually have both. They do have a drum roaster for some of what they do, and then they have continuous
I think it's a drum roaster for nips.
Oh, that's right. You're right.
Yeah, which is really weird.
Yeah, they do.
Around 70 kilos.
Yeah. They do. Yeah, we were talking about like LaFleur, who's a chocolate maker in Zurich, does nib roasting, which I always thought was really fascinating because the beans they get are winnowed ahead of time, and so then they get what is in essence raw nib, and then they get to roast it because the beans are getting processed by somebody who has a micronizer to get the shell off before they come to them. I think it's actually a really interesting approach because it means now you don't have to deal with the shell and what to do with that, and it's like fewer, less equipment, but you also still get to control the flavor profile. So I really like that idea.
Great people too.
Great people.
Well, that was a nice chat on roasting.
Roasting.
I think that.
See, we could have roasted each other.
Next episode.
Thank you, Crap Talk.
See you next time.